welcome to everybody. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for coming tonight to our Christmas lecture, an annual event. And the first thing I'm going to do is a huge thank you to Sarah and Monica, who've organised this event and who will be no strangers to you, because they will have been in communication with you about organising meetings. And thank you to you, those of you who are also here and online. Many of you may remember that last year we had the Christmas lecture, but it was online. But this year, here we are in the Lamb. And it's my job, Martin Maiden, as the head of department, to introduce the two significant participants this evening. And the first of these, of course, is the Lamb, the building you're in. We're delighted to be here. It's been a long journey. As you can see, this is a fantastic building. We share it with the experimental psychology, and those of you who were here before will realise we used to share another building with experimental psychology, the Timbergen building, but we never saw the experimental psychologists because they were in a completely separate bit. Now that's completely changed. This building is an open building, and you just see everybody all the time, which is fantastic. The design has been enormously successful in that respect. So EP have offices here, and they have their testing labs. Biology, all of our teaching is done on this floor and the floor above. We can teach 1,100 to 1,200 students simultaneously, which does wonders for the cafe, by the way. But anyway, and then we have facilities for working in microbiology on the first floor of what we call the flex block, which is the laboratories. The second floor, we do animal biology. On the third floor, on the roof, we do plant biology, plant molecular biology, including being able to grow crop plants on the roof. And we have a very large group of environmental biology. So we do microbes, animals, plants, the environment, and we do that at the molecular level, the organismal level, and the environmental level. This is truly a biology department of enormous scale and ambition, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our new home. But of course, now I've got to introduce the real star of the show today, our very own Beth Mortimer. It is a special pleasure for me to introduce Beth. Well, one, I'm biased because she's my fellow tutor at Hertford College, so that makes me very biased. The other reason, of course, is that she's one of you, not one of me, unfortunately, because I'm a graduate of the microbiology department at Reading and the biochemistry department of Cambridge. But Beth, like you, is a graduate of the degree here, and a graduate of whom we're enormously proud. She came here at New College. She then went on there to do her DPhil. She did spread her wings a little to go to Bristol for a while with a fellowship of the Royal Commission of 1851, before returning here and gaining a university research fellowship. And now, more recently, she's got the associate professorship tutorial fellowship in Hertford College. And she's going to tell you about the astonishing work that she's been doing I think it's going to be interactive, and there's an opportunity to deal with Beth. So without more ado, over to Beth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about the research that we've been doing on seismic sensors. If you haven't had a chance already, we've got a multi-sensory exhibit outside where you can feel some of the vibrations that we've recorded through our research as well. So if you haven't had the chance already, that will be open at the end of the lecture as well. For those of you online, I do have a QR code here where you can check out the online exhibit that we also developed, so you can still find out more about our research online as well. I wanted to start this lecture giving a tribute to an exceptional biologist, Ian Douglas Hamilton. He did his DPhil here in the department, handing in 1972 under the supervision of Nico Tinbergen. And he went on to found Save the Elephants charity. And I was lucky to work briefly on one of my projects with Ian. And I will talk about some of his insights on some of my projects, one of my projects a little bit later. But I came across this quote from Ian that made me reflect on how I've come to be where I am with my research. So he said, I think that people who enter the wildlife field very often have a basic passion that comes out of some early childhood experiences. And elephants were the particular animal that I became hooked on. I think for me, I haven't become hooked on one particular animal, but it really resonated with me, this idea of this passion that comes from early childhood experience. And for me, it was a combination of both animals and music. And I was told at school that these two are too distinct. There wasn't any kind of connection between the two. But I've really now kind of forged a research area that kind of brings these two passions together. So I started off my research journey thinking about silks, and it was how silks are able to transmit vibrations. So my thesis was on the sonic properties of silks. It used mostly material science techniques to answer biological questions about spiders and silkworms. And following on from that, I started to look at other animals that also use vibrations through materials for information, looking at very different scales from nematode worms through to African elephants. And more recently, the group has been focusing on mostly the spider and elephant work, but we've also published on a range of different animal species in the meantime. And I think it's this cartoon of fiddler crabs in the corner that really summarizes my interest here. So the first female crab says, "Ooh, I love watching them wave." And the second says, "Me too, but it's even better when they start thumping the sand." So I do love watching animals, but it's listening in to this almost secret vibration channel that they have, how they're able to communicate through materials, that I found really fascinating in my research. So I've split this talk up into 4 stories or sections, and each one will start off with a sound that we've recorded through our research. So I'm going to play you this first sound, and I would love to get some suggestions from the audience on what you think you might be listening to. But I wanted to remind you first off that these sounds are not recorded using a microphone. So we have transformed them to be audible for you, but they're all recorded from sounds along surfaces. So have a look, have a listen to this first one, and then if anyone's got any suggestions, we can throw these famous cube microphones at you so that you can tell us what you think they are. So here's the first one. And apologies online if you can't hear the vibration very clearly. There will be a lot of tracks online, and hopefully you can hear some of them. Does anyone in the room have a suggestion for what they think it is? And it is not an elephant, no. It's a good suggestion as a first go. Anyone got another suggestion? Great suggestion. So actually what I'm going to say is that I'm not going to confirm whether that is correct yet. And we're going to keep you under tension until the end of the talk when I'll give you the answer to this. But what I can confirm is that this is the sound of one species trying to communicate with another member of its same species. So this first story is all going to be about communicating using these sound through surfaces. And I wanted to start off with the fiddler crabs. We did a project in Portugal to have a look at fiddler crab courtship behavior. Fiddler crabs are quite well known for the males have an enlarged claw on one side, and they use it to wave at the females. And essentially they're advertising their presence, but also their appeal to any crab ladies in the vicinity. And we were interested in this project to record the vibrations through the sand. So what behaviors during a male courtship display are generating these vibrations through the sand. So have a look at this video, and remember that what you're listening to here is the vibration through the sand that we've recorded using these geophones that you can see in red here. So they record sand vibration. And it's very subtle, but there's also vibration underground as well. So they're drumming the ground above their burrow. then they disappear into their burrow and they drum some more for the ladies underneath the sand as well. And what we did in this project was basically be able to show a larger range of the male courtship behaviors than we thought were generating vibrations through the ground. So from the non-percussive behaviors, so essentially the waving that they do of their claws, then through to their more vigorous body dropping, then through to the drumming behavior, there was an escalation over their courtship routine of having more and more of this seismic energy, this vibration through the sand. So this is just one aspect of communication then, using these vibrations through the sand, but it's part of a multimodal sequence that also uses these visual cues as well. But crabs aren't the only animals that communicate using vibrations through the sand or another type of ground substrate. These, of course, are the beautiful African elephants, and they generate many types of vocalizations, but one type that they generate is called a rumble. And the rumbles are very low frequency vocalizations, they're very loud. And the vibration propagates not only through the air, so that you can pick it up on a microphone or hear them, but it also vibrates the ground. So essentially their vocal cords are making mini earthquakes through the ground as they make these rumble vocalizations. And the elephants are thought to detect these ground vibrations as well. And there's two possible ways that they can do this. The first is using Pacinian corpuscles. So these are the vibration sensors you've got embedded in your skin. You also have these types of vibration sensors. Elephants have quite a big distribution of these on their feet. The other mechanism they could use is bone conduction. So the floor vibrating then vibrates the bones within their legs, which then gets transformed into their middle and inner ear. And here are some recordings we've done of elephant rumbles in Kenya. And these show a visual representation of sound, or spectrograms. So on the left, we've got an acoustic recording of a rumble. So this is recorded using a microphone. And on the right, you've got a seismic recording of the same rumble, which was recorded using a seismic sensor. And the spectrograms give you time on the x-axis, frequency on the y-axis, and then the color gives you the relative amplitude of that frequency at that time. So let's have a listen to an acoustic component of an elephant rumble. And I've put this up an octave and I've amplified it just so that we can make an easier comparison to the seismic component. And let's listen to the seismic recording of the same rumble. Again, reminding you this is up an octave. So I've always thought this sounded like a kind of ghostly moo, and essentially this is what the elephants are doing in the ground. They're using these frequency modulated calls, essentially mooing into the ground, which vibrates both the air and the ground at the same time. And it's playback experiments that have led us to say that elephants use seismic communication. So if you record a rumble from an elephant that's in an alarming situation, so an alarm rumble, and play back just the seismic recording of that rumble, so without the acoustic component, you find that the elephants don't only respond, showing that they have seismic sensitivity, but they also respond in a way that shows that information has been transferred. So in this case, showing vigilant behavior and showing defensive grouping, showing that they've understood that this is an alarm rumble. And that's the key piece of evidence for seismic communication in elephants. We've been lucky enough to do some research on this in a very beautiful part of the world in Kenya. And most of our research to date has been done at Impala Research Centre. And back in 2023, we put out thousands of seismic sensors, along with acoustic sensors and camera traps in a very large array. So it's 1 kilometre by 4 kilometres. We put out over 1,200 seismic sensors in this array so that we could record how the seismic components of rumbles move through the natural environment of the elephants, also recording them acoustically. And then we validate elephant presence using those camera traps at dams at either side of the array. And we recorded for over 3 months. So we've got a huge amount of data to get through, and we are still working on it. But what's really accelerating our analysis at the moment is the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're now able to take quite noisy recordings from our sensors and be able to extract contours from this noisy data so that we can quantify the seismic recordings of elephant rumbles, compare them to the acoustic component, and then look at how that changes as they propagate through the environment at these kilometer scales. And it's all to answer this question: why do elephants use seismic communication? This has always bothered me. Why not just have the acoustic component? Why use this seismic component at all? So that's something that we're still analysing. So do watch this space for what our findings are from this particular study. So now through to our second section, or a second story, and I've got another sound for you. And again, anyone got any ideas what they're listening to here, please do shout out, or we can try throwing the microphone cube at you as well. So here's the second sound. Yes. It's not deer, no. Good guess. Any other ideas? Spiders. It's related to spiders. It's not a recording of a spider. Very close. It's a cockroach. Wonderful. So this is the sound of a cockroach moving on a bromeliad leaf. So this second story is all about detecting subtle cues. And I would argue that spiders really are the specialists in this particular field. They need to be able to detect these cues that are made by moving prey, where the prey don't want to be detected at all. But the spiders are very good at being able to detect these so that they can be able to capture. And this is the species that it's relevant to, this cockroach recording. This is a beautiful Cupienus spider on its bromeliad leaf. And you can see a red dot there. That red dot is from our laser vibrometer. And this is the equipment that we have in our lab in order to detect how surfaces move. So effectively, it works like a non-contact microphone. So by focusing the laser on a surface, you're then transforming the motion that it picks up into a recording. And in this case, we made it audible for you on the previous slide. But for spiders, it doesn't just have to be vibrations through leaves that's important. Of course, you've got a lot of web specialists as well. And here we've got a lovely Araneus diadematus on its web. So let's have a look at how the web functions during its prey capture. So these beautiful orb webs are not just for prey interception, but they're also sensory platforms for the spider. So within tens of milliseconds, the spider not only knows that something's hit the web, but it knows that it's something it wants to eat, and it knows which direction to start running off into. So these silks and these webs are also playing a really important role for that sensory transduction to the spider. And let's have a listen to a vibrometer recording on a web. So this is of a fly hitting a web, and just to warn you that this recording might make you jump. So what you've heard there is the initial impact of the fly into the web. You've then got a little bit of struggling within the web that's picked up by the vibrometer recording before it is freed at the end. So in this case, the spider wasn't fast enough to intercept the prey. And one of my early research questions was around whether spiders can tune their web to be able to detect subtle vibration cues. So similar to an analogy of a musician tuning its musical instrument. So because the spider makes its own material, it makes its own web, are they able to filter and change vibrations as it moves through the web before it's detected by the spider? And in order to answer this, we used a mixture of laser vibrometry onto orb webs and also FEA models of our spider webs as well, as shown in this video. And we were looking at the factors that influence how vibrations move through the web. And we found that it was a combination of architecture, so the geometry of the web and the specifics of how the spider chooses which materials go where within its structure. But it's also a case of silk tension having a major role within the web as well, and silk stiffness. And in fact, silk stiffness is one of the most special things about spider webs, because spider dragline silk has a uniquely tunable material because it's got a huge range of different stiffnesses available to it. And in combination, all of these factors are potentially under the control of spiders before or during web building. So they can adjust web architecture, silk tension, and silk stiffness, which gives them these control mechanisms for changing how vibrations move through their web. Where my thinking went with this later on was that this was only part of the story. So if we think of this as stage one, so vibrations propagate through some type of surface. So here, the spider web, vibrations move from the source, the fly, to the spider. There's actually something that happens after that that often people ignore. And this is the role of the body itself in vibration transmission. So how big the spider is, the properties of the spider itself, also how it interacts with that surface. All of that together can potentially interact, filter, and change the vibrations before sensory transduction. So as a third step, you would then get sensory transduction by the vibration sensors in the spider. So this is one research field that we've looked at, what the effect of the spider body is on vibration sensing as well. And this is the star of the show for this particular project. This is the gorgeous Brazilian black tarantula. When we were researching which spiders to use for this project, I knew that this one was the one when I read online for people that keep these as pets, that these are just like kittens. And I completely agree. What we needed was a spider that would sit on a vibrating platform, and that's what you can see in this video here. And we could vibrate the spider without it moving at all. And in fact, it's very difficult to make these spiders move at all. So these were perfect for our experiments, and we were able to use the laser vibrometer to measure how the spider's body reacts when you vibrate it. And we used, again, a mixture of laser vibrometry and modeling to look at what effect the spider body has on vibration sensing. And this is an approach called modal analysis. So it's very commonly used in engineering. Effectively, you vibrate something, and then you look at what its natural frequencies are. So again, analogous to how many musical instruments work, they have a natural frequency. So we've measured here the natural frequencies of our tarantula, and in this first video, you can see how it moves in its second mode at one particular frequency. So effectively, it bounces up and down and it pitches forward. And this is just a property of the biomechanics of the spider body itself. And we were interested in making models from this to see how simple can this be explained. And it turns out that for a spider vibrating, all you need to know is the mass and have 8 springs and dampers associated with it. And that's what this model represents. You've got a mass that's vibrating on 8 springs. And this is sufficient to explain how the spider body reacts when you vibrate it. And this plays a role in its vibration sensing. And in particular, it's the front 2 legs. If you change the properties of those front 2 legs within the model, then that changes a lot of how the spider body reacts. And again, that's under the spider's control. So by changing the posture or the mechanics of the front 2 legs, they can have, again, a huge amount of influence over how its body is contributing to vibration sensing. And I've told you that this section is about detecting subtle cues. And there's an obvious application of this. So if you can understand the mechanisms of how a system such as a spider is able to detect very subtle vibrations from a surface, then the idea is that you can have inspiration then for developing new types of sensors for different applications within engineering. And on this point, I will now turn to a short video that's been made that explains this link a little bit further.
So did you know that if you scream at a spider, it can't hear you? If you stamped next to it, it would be able to feel those vibrations travelling through the ground. Many animals can sense vibrations through the ground, including humans. But for things like spiders, this is their primary sensory modality, and the amount of information that they can extract from that is far higher than ours.
They use vibrations from their prey to help them detect where food is. So it's their main sensory input for predation. They also generate vibrations during courtship. So when males and females are trying to find each other to mate.
Working at the Interface of Biology and Engineering means that we look at a biological animal like the spider and model it as a biomechanical system. So this enables us to give insights into how vibrations are received by the spider and what the response is to vibrations transmitted through the ground, plants, or an engineered substrate like the spider's web.
A lot of what they're doing is detecting the presence and the location of other types of animals. So they use vibrations for that, partly because it's very difficult for an animal to hide the vibration that it makes as it moves.
Cupidus spiders can't see red light, and that's why we're using that to film today. So this Polytech laser vibrometer is the piece of equipment that we use to measure vibrations on the surface of the spider or the leaf that it's on. So when we focus the laser on the cuticle of the spider, that enables us to measure exactly how this cuticle moves as a vibrational wave travels through it. We can learn from millions of years of spider evolution and take inspiration from this to develop the next generation of vibration sensors. One important application of vibration sensors is understanding how structures like buildings respond to vibrations like earthquakes through the ground.
Part of the reason why we're doing this work is to understand more about spiders, but also by unpicking these mechanisms of how they're able to get this information, we might be able to find inspiration for the design of new types of sensors for robotics. So particularly how biology can inform new types of soft robots that are perhaps away from the metal robots you might think about, something that's a little bit more inspired by nature, that's making use of these embedded sensors the same way that animals do. Great, and that leads us to our third section and our third story and our new sound that we've got to take us into this. And again, very happy to hear any suggestions for what we're hearing with this sound. Right, any ideas for this one? Oh, say that again. A lion. This one is not a lion, no? Good suggestion. Sorry? A cat. It's not a cat either. So this one is actually the one that we most mistake for an elephant rumble. But it's not generated by an animal at all. This is actually a motorbike, which is an example of a human generated noise, or an anthropogenic noise. So this third section is all about noise and how we're starting to see that this could potentially be a problem for the animals that are using vibrations through materials for information. And that's going to remind you what the elephant rumble sounds like. So for our machine learning algorithms, the one thing that it tends to get wrong the most is that it either thinks that cars or motorbikes are rumbles. So that tells you how it might potentially be a problem for the elephants as well. So in this video, I'm going to show you something that we recorded in Samburu in Kenya. So we played seismic noise to a group of elephants. This group of elephants in Samburu, they all have names. This was the First Lady's family. And I remember very clearly Ian Douglas Hamilton being in the car with me. And I remember how surprised he was from what we saw, from the responses that we were seeing. So what you'll see in this video, it's been sped up by 8 times, but the first 2 minutes of the video in real time would be the background behavior of the elephants. And you've then got a seismic stimulus that's played to them, and you'll be able to see what their response is. Okay. And I remember Ian being in the car and saying, you know, this response is very similar to what he had looked at with the elephant responses to bee acoustic noise, which of course has now been taken by Save the Elephants to be a very successful way to mitigate human-elephant conflict. But I remember him being very excited about this being purely due to a vibration through the ground that we were playing at the elephants. And for this experiment in Samburu, we had 3 different tracks that we were playing to the elephants. So in that video, you saw the blue track. So that's the combination of an elephant alarm rumble that's been overlaid with white noise as a form of human-generated noise. The other 2 tracks we played were an elephant rumble in orange, or we had white noise in pink, which was the same frequency content and amplitude as the rumble, the same time pattern, but it was noise rather than the rumble. And what we quantified was basically how far the elephants kind of retreated from the site. And in the dashed line there is basically the maximum that they could move away. So that's kind of moving away a body length for every 30 seconds. And you can see in the blue, in the treatment where they had the most amount of noise, they were most likely to move away. And then less so for the pink that contained less noise and didn't really move away at all for the elephant rumble. This isn't the finding we thought we would get, but what I included in this paper, having talked to Ian Douglas Hamilton, was in the grey triangles there, you've got how elephants move away in response to bee acoustic noise. So just to give a comparison to a different stimulus. So this showed for the first time that the elephants were moving away in response to a human-generated noise, and that they were associating it with risk. So by moving away, they were able to get away from the stimulus. And a lot more research needs to go into this question of how animals respond to noise. In this figure here, in black, you've got the known seismic sensitivity of different types of animals. So whether that's frogs, earthworms, the fiddler crabs, kangaroo rats, the range of frequencies that it's known that they respond to. And in the background there, you've got the frequency ranges of different types of human-generated noise. So we've got urban noise, concerts and sports, or aircrafts, for example. And the main takeaway message from this paper is that there is a huge amount of overlap here between the ranges that we know animals are sensitive to and the frequencies that we're generating through human activity. But this is something that needs a lot more research. We do know that human activities and seismic noise is increasing, but what we don't have is a lot of empirical data, especially from playback experiments, that's able to test what this actually means for the animals themselves. So we now move on to the final section and the final story. And I do have one more sound for our little guessing game here. So I'll play this sound now. Anyone got any ideas for this one? A heartbeat. It always strikes me how this sounds like a heartbeat. I'm really glad that you said that. The combination of the time pattern as well as kind of 1 per minute that it's 1 per second that it's got there really strikes me as being similar to a heartbeat. It's actually the footsteps of a giraffe. So this is the animal that has the best signal to noise ratio that we've recorded in Kenya for its footsteps. So something to do with the combination of its size and its foot morphology, we're able to really cleanly pick up giraffe footsteps. So this section is all about eavesdropping. So how can we as humans listen into vibrations through the ground and find out something about the biology of the animals we're listening into, and even the applications of this for things like conservation monitoring. So usually when I talk about seismic monitoring with a biological audience, I have to justify why I would be looking at using seismic data for this. There are lots of established methods for monitoring wildlife, camera traps being a really good example. But let me give you my pitch for why I think this is worth the time looking at. So firstly, seismic vibrations are really rich, and I hope this talk has given you a flavour for how animals are making use of this really information-rich source of information. So whether this is footfalls, so we just heard a giraffe there, all of these animals that incidentally generate vibrations through the ground, but we can also pick up animal vocalizations as well. So we've got lots of different sources of biological information we can listen into. And I've also made the case that we can listen to human activity as well. So we've got a proxy for saying what humans are up to in the area and correlate that with what we see in terms of the animals. So this is all in one type of sensor information that we're getting. I've talked to you a lot about elephants, I've talked to you about giraffes, but this doesn't just work for these large species. So you can move sensors closer together and you can pick up the vibrations that they make, even for smaller species that you might be interested in. So you can adapt this for smaller species as well. Unlike camera traps, you don't have field of view issues. Camera traps are very good within a very specified range of their camera. But with the seismic sensors, we've effectively got 360 degrees of information that you've put in. They're also hidden underground, and this is becoming more and more important for certain parts of the world where you don't want animals or humans that are coming and disrupting your sensors. So by having hidden sensors, that can be an advantage for certain places. But they also rely on lower power and memory, unlike camera-based systems, simply because of the amounts of bytes of information that they're collecting as they record. And potentially, you have sensors that are quite cheap and easy to deploy. Now, this is the one constraining factor at the moment, because this isn't currently the case, but there's lots of potential that we could have open access and cheap sensors. And this is another thing that we're focusing on to enable this to be rolled out more widely. So here again, we've got a visual representation of the sound of giraffe footsteps, and underneath it, you've got an elephant footstep as well. And there's different factors that control how these are different. So part of it is to do with the weight or the size of the animal affects what we're picking up from its footsteps, but it's also its gait, how it moves around, and also its foot morphology as well. So elephants are actually surprisingly soft-footed. For any of you that have had the chance to see elephants walking around, they have a lot of movement within their foot as they're moving around. So it's the giraffes that have the highest signal-to-noise ratio. And what we've been able to do from these types of recordings, what these are representing on the right is basically it's a fingerprint of a combination of the amplitude, the frequency, and the time pattern of your recording that gives basically a footprint fingerprint in one diagram. For those of you interested, these are second-order scattering coefficients, but really you can just look at these this is the essential information that gives you the species-specific information from the footfalls. So there's a lot of potential here to generate footfall detectors, for example, from the seismic data in order to see where the animals are and where they're going within a sensor array. Right, so now's the time for me to relieve the tension that I set up at the beginning of the talk. You heard a recording right at the beginning. And I think someone said that it was a big cat or a lion, and that is exactly correct. So at the beginning, we started off with our communication hearing a seismic recording of a lion roar. So what I wanted to show on this slide was how that looks as it moves through our sensor array. So on the left, we've got the recording of the lion roar from our acoustic sensors. And remember, we had fewer acoustic sensors within the array. So they're shown by the orange dots that light up as it picks something up. And then on the right, you've got how our seismic sensors are picking up the lion roar as well. And that will be purple dots that are lighting up. So let's see what a lion roar looks like as it moves through our sensor array in Kenya. So we're picking this up with seismic sensors nearly 4 kilometers away from the lion. I've just been blown away by what our seismic sensors are able to pick up. And it's a really exciting direction that we can not only pick up the footfalls, but we can pick up these low and loud vocalizations from the animals as well. I'm not saying that lions use seismic communication, but I am saying that they generate a lot of seismic vibration that we can pick up. And whether or not they can pick it up too actually is untested as well. So with that, I'm going to finish on a final video that's going to talk a little bit about how this can be applied within a conservation context.
Understanding how elephants respond to seismic activity is very important in shared landscapes that are undergoing a lot of development. We have been able to pick very fine changes in elephant movement behavior, which we can very easily relate to the risk of lots of human activities, from farming, from roads, from railways. It's a shared landscape. We are in an era of great infrastructural development in Africa, and understanding how the noise impacts the elephants is quite an important milestone.
Because animals are so sensitive to vibrations that might come through materials, it means that there are a lot of activities, maybe that people aren't aware of, that are generating this sensory information that might affect animals. Wind turbines, military activity, cars that are driving around on the African savannah, for example. What we've been able to show is that they respond to human-generated vibrations through the ground, and they respond to it in a way that they associate with risk.
It's a new frontier in understanding elephant behavioral response, not just to risk, but even possibly to opportunities. It's been very productive having Beth Mortimer's team in Kenya for this experiment. It's a shared landscape, so we strive to understand how elephants perceive the landscape, how they make decisions.
We put out this big grid of sensors back in 2023, and that holds 1,220 seismic sensors buried in the ground. So every single red dot on this diagram shows a seismic sensor buried in the ground 50 meters apart. And imagine this is in the thick, dense African bush, so it's not on typical roads you're seeing here. So it's quite a big effort, but it means that we can get very, very detailed sensor data, which means we can track animals over many kilometers, potentially using this method of seismic vibrations, and therefore we can aid conservation strategies. So for example, we can say, okay, there's an elephant coming from far away, we can warn local people or villagers that there might be an elephant, and it reduces elephant-human conflict.
When we set those ground sensors, a team on the ground, in just a few weeks, we were able to actually pick up and distinguish the behavioral responses of elephants to various seismic waves. So to come to understand that elephants perceive seismic energy is enlightening and it's intriguing.
Great. So with that, that is the end of my talk. So I will thank all the funders that have made all of this research possible. And of course, this research is not done in isolation. And I've tried to say we throughout, and I've tried to credit those that have contributed to this research as well. But just to give a full list of everyone that's contributed to this, I may have been the only one that's been involved in all the research projects I've talked about here, but this really is a web of lots of different experts that all contribute to what we've talked about. So thank you to the whole team, and especially for Tommy and Alice, who have been helping out with the multisensory experience outside as well. So with that, I will finish up, and I'll gladly take any questions from online or in the room as well. Thank you.